about the Middle Passage, kind of the beginning of the slavery system in America, how the establishment of it and the practices that we saw, these would continue until and during the Civil War. So today's life in slavery is going to be closer to the time of the Civil War, so it's going to be a closer resemblance as that one, as opposed to what we would have looked at yesterday. So, first thing I want to show you with, so this map, the darker shaded in areas are going to be the areas that have a higher slave population. So just take some time to look at them. And once you've looked at it, if you want to turn to a partner and tell me any commonalities or trends that you're seeing from this map.
Yeah, and then it's like a lot of they're all around the one that there's a lot only up to
Simon's group, what was a realization that you had?
The South is very dark.
Okay. As in
What? To the script group.
Okay, so use terms that you would use in high school.
That's what we said.
The population of the slaves was greater diverse in the South.
Yeah.
Thank you. Where are we going to see areas of concentration? Aiden?
The population centers like that the coastal region of Texas and also near rivers like Mississippi.
So the rivers, that would have been, why do you think they would have been a lot around the rivers? Jason?
Irrigation.
Irrigation. So what would the irrigation benefit that would also, that the institution of slavery would be found in?
Like crop, like pasture, like pasture.
Right, so closer to the river, you're gonna have better agriculture. So you're gonna have bigger plantations, right? If you know what a plantation is, the large farms that you would have found in the South. So that would make sense that the closer to the water, the better the agriculture, the bigger the institution. Right. This is just a picture of the southern part. Now, not to say that slavery didn't happen in the North, but it was a lot more common in the South, and that's why it's just of the South.
I did not realize that wasn't that the North was.
There we go. So this is kind of an image of what you'd see. So we have the plantation there. The slaves are working in the fields. They have a multitude of jobs. You know, you have those that are doing the work, those that are transporting what was just picked, both in the baskets and on the wagon, some driving the wagon. It's almost like a little world of its own, isn't it? A lot of the plantations would be more self-sufficient. As far as distribution goes, and this would be something good to have in your notes, 3/4 of Southern whites did not own slaves. And of those that did own slaves, 88% owned 20 or less. So if you know anything about like the size of the institution of slavery, there was a lot of slaves within this. So it's kind of shocking to think about how only 3/4 of the southern population owned them. And of those that owned, that means 12% owned more than 20. Jeremiah?
So the 3/4 owned slaves or they didn't own slaves?
Did not own slaves.
Okay.
Sorry. So 1/4 did, and of that 1/4, 12% had more than 20. And those 12% would fall under most generally the plantation category. And then there was kind of, if you think general, there was kind of two types. You would either have the house servants, is what they were referred to as, and they would be the slaves that worked within the house. You could say it was an easier placement, not to say any of it was easy, but you could say it was a more of an easier placement because there was a less hard labor involved with that. You weren't as exposed to the elements, but it did have its trials of its own. And then, of course, the other side, Ty, would be the field slaves, and they were going to be the ones that are doing all the hard agricultural labor, working 12 days a week. How many days are in a week?
7.
Exactly. And working 16 hours a day. Here a second, I can take a break. Thank you. As far as housing goes for them, you have to kind of figure out, and we'll look at this, we have an activity that we're going to look at a property that did own slaves. So we'll get to see this in full detail. But one of the important things to know is that they would have been found in specific living areas. They weren't allowed to live wherever they wanted to live on the farm or anything like that. And there's going to be a vast difference between the building that the owners or the masters would have lived in as compared to where the slaves would have lived. And a lot of times, if you think of your own home, how many families do you guys have living in your house? One. Ty?
Oh, you said how many?
Yep. One? Yeah, so you would know that in a household, one family, that's all you've ever known. A lot of times you're gonna have multiple families to one house, as many as 10 families in one house. And do you think these houses were anywhere near the size as the homes that you have now? Exactly. So sometimes I'm sure, even with, how many of you have siblings? How many of you think that your house is not big enough because you're always trampling over your siblings? You know, if you have to get ready for school in the morning, trying to get to the bathroom, all the bathrooms are taken, anything like that. Or if you help cook, and somebody's always in the kitchen and you're always falling over top of them, right? Yeah, so there's some light bulbs. So you have one family in your house that was bigger than they would have had, and you're already tripping over people. So this is kind of the layout of a general layout of a plantation. So you have the big house is what they would have called it, and probably because it's the biggest house on the property, right? So you have the big house. They would have had the stable for the horses, the livestock, that kind of thing. The garden, all centered in, and then over to the edge, they would have put the slave holders. Now, if you think about a massive plantation, when you kind of try to tuck the slave quarters away, and they have to walk the whole way to wherever they're going, they're going to be late, then you have more beatings, even though you caused that issue. So it was one of those things that they designed within the institution to make it harder on the slaves. Nothing to write down on that, just kind of an idea of what we're looking at. There we go. So food, kind of have to think of how would the slaves eat? They aren't getting paid for their jobs. How are they getting food? Anything like that? Rarely would they have materials to cook with, such as pots and pans or anything like that. How many of you have ever done any cooking in your life? And in that cooking that you've used, how many of you have used a pot and or a pan? How many of you have not used a pot or pan while cooking? What would you make? What'd you make?
Peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Salad. What'd you make?
You know how you gotta make ramen noodles in the microwave?
Oh, so you just did it straight in the bowl?
Yeah.
Okay, so they wouldn't have gotten bowls either.
Oh.
But I didn't say bowls, so good point. Ian?
Mine was the same.
Okay. So yeah, think of how hard that would have made it. And then back to that contextualization. If you're running something, you're gonna want to spend as little as possible to make something run, right? Like a business or something like that. You have to apply that to the plantations because in the master's minds, the plantations was their business, right? So you're gonna try to spend on little as food as possible. What kind of meals do you think that makes for the slaves? Ty? Just in general.
Eggs.
Okay. So like a good meal, like a good hearty meal, or
Not really a good meal.
not really a good meal?
I'll take a meal just to get through the day.
Right. Okay. If even, right? So a lot of times what they have gotten is anybody who likes steak? Do you ever get a steak that has the fat on the outside of your steak? Who eats it? So some of you do like it. How many of you don't like it? So a lot of times what you would have gotten is the fatty pieces of the meat. It's just the fat, very little meat within it as your dinner, as your meal. Anything as cheap as rice, something like that, that's gonna be what it what it consisted of. Chase?
Don't they also take some out of their own products so they don't have to spend money on anything else?
If we'll get to that, yeah. So slaves were allowed some free time when there wasn't any work to do. Use that used loosely. They could have had their own garden, yep. And then a lot of times what they would have done is use that garden to supplement their diet. So that's how they would have improved their diet. Yep. Clothing. The clothing they would have gotten, this is on a yearly basis. They received one pair of shoes, and they received 3 items of underwear. Whatever you want to imagine, that's what they received. Now, how long did I say that they would work on average? Like time frame? Simon? 16 hours a day. How many days a week? 7 days a week. You might have gotten one day off for Sunday, depending on your master's views, that kind of thing. So you could, some of them you could argue 6, but we'll say 7 for the sake of it. So 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, same pair of shoes, extremely hard labor. How many of you think that the shoes lasted past January? Exactly. So you have 1 pair of shoes and 3 items of underwear. You don't have a whole lot to go off of. So that was just kind of to put it in perspective for you there. And then like I said, the free time, there wasn't a whole lot because they would have been worked from sun up to sundown. And they didn't have like big flashlights or spotlights, so you had to use the sun's light. So any time you would have had would have been in darkness, so it would be harder for you to see to work on things. But in this time, they would have made some things to help with living. They would have maybe tried to improve their houses, make them a little less drafty or anything like that, more comfortable. Try to make those pots and pans out of the resources that they could find. And like I said, do some gardening. Now, say Aiden and Jeremiah wanted to organize a day for everybody in here to skip class. We're not coming to class, but you're only allowed to organize it in this room. Obviously, you don't want me or Mr. Swatala to know about it because are we going to let it happen? How do you think a good way that they would get the message to you guys to not go to class would be? Mikey?
A group chat on like Snapchat or something.
Okay, a group chat. How are you gonna get the information off of a group chat? Mikey?
Like that would just basically tell you what day and what it is.
So how did you figure out what day?
I'll tell you.
And how did you get the information from your phone and put it in your brain?
You read it.
You read it. How did they put the information from their phone from their head to their phone? Javon. Okay, such as, yeah, symbols, but make it a little bigger. How did they put the information from their head to their phone? It's a form of symbols. They wrote it, right? They wrote it on their phone. You got the message, you read it. Now, why do you think slaves were not allowed to read and write?
They could like potentially work together to like uprise and get out.
You could communicate with each other without people knowing. I mean, you weren't going to be in a group chat, but there would have been ways for them to write down, hey, this day we're leaving, this day we're striking back. For that reason, they were not allowed to learn how to read or to write. Just kind of some images of what they would have encountered. Here's an image of an auction. We read about that yesterday. And then this is not a hanging, and I want to make sure that we know that. They're just being bound so that they can't strike back for punishment. So like I said, if you imagine the slave quarters are on the far corner of the property, and it's the other field that you have to work in today is 4 miles away, but you have to be there at sunup. That would be an example. If you're late to work, you would be punished. So just some things to think about. If you want to open up your computer, yeah, Ty. Yes, yep, go ahead and sign out. If you want to open up your computer and go to OneNote, there's an activity called, it's the first website. Once we have it pulled up, I don't remember what I labeled it exactly. But it's going to be a virtual tour. Now, once you have the OneNote open and that link open, it's under the websites. You'll have to go back to Teams, and I pushed down an assignment to guide your exploration. So you click on the slavery and then go to the websites. And the Thomas Owens tour, that's the one that we're going to. And then once you have that link up, go back to Teams. And I think I called that one the Slavery Web Quest. And you'll use those questions to guide it. So what you'll find when you get to that website is an area, a piece of property, and it has a couple different buildings. You can click on the building and go to it. At the top of whatever you click into, top middle, there's, I think it says home, or it says something like that, depends on how far you get into it. That'll take you back to the overview of the property in order for you to answer a different set of questions, okay? So make sure we have the Teams open, the Teams assignment open beside the web quest. Anybody having trouble finding it?
Yeah, I thought we were waiting to start.
Nope, you can start now. So it might be nice for you to just take some time and look around, take some time to read the questions. Once you've looked around and you've read the questions, answer the questions, if you wanna answer the questions, and then look around, however you wanna do it.